Hello everyone, welcome to the 204th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this episode, I'd like to go back to discussions about time, space, free will, some basic ontological questions. So it's really important that you look at episode 177 if you haven't watched it, because I'm going to leverage many of the kind of arguments and insights from that episode in this one. So the first thing to realize is that why does time and space exist in the first place? What is the reason for their existence? Or even the existence of matter and of contact and of inner-outer boundaries, all of these things. So if you go back to episode 177, you understand that consciousness in its unitary state, in a state of total emptiness, interacts with itself without knowing that it is itself. And it has two sets of reactions. One, that this is just me, I recognize this as me, or it could have the thought of meeting something outside of itself and saying, this is not me. To be or not to be, right? Like one of the most fundamental questions. If consciousness has the this is not me kind of reaction, then it creates a dissociation within itself. And a dissociation is like this clinical kind of term for describing someone that has multiple personalities within his own kind of mind. And it's a well-documented phenomenon, which means those diverging personalities are not even aware of one another, which is very, very interesting. But what that means is that the moment that this consciousness experiences dissociation, that is, that a part of it has been deemed to exist outside of itself as not being part of its unified being, it has a kind of a womb, if you will, a wound, a trauma, you could say, of being excluded from its state of oneness. But the problem is, a dissociated consciousness is still in a state of oneness because it cannot not be one. It's impossible. It can only think or have the illusion that it is not one because it has been identified as being outside of, this unitary consciousness. Almost by chance. It's not like there's an intention here behind it. And in order to overcome the illusion of being separated, it needs to experience, it needs to have an experience of being reunified with the one. But understand that separation is already an illusion, which means it has to create the illusion of overcoming the illusion of being separated. You understand? This is kind of messed up, but it'll make much more sense when I go into the concreteness of things. And how do you overcome the illusion of separation? Well, by creating the illusion of reunification. And how do you create the illusion of reunification? Well, first of all, you need to give a definite form to yourself. Otherwise, if you can't interact with anything, then you cannot have an experience of reunifying things. And so, to me, that's where life comes into play, because life is the only thing in our reality that has an inner and outer boundary. That is, that an inner boundary where there's processes going on inside, and then there's the outer environment. Now, obviously, if you watched all my videos, you understand that the outer environment only emerges via the interaction of life with itself. But what I mean here is that in order to overcome separation, you need to assume a form that is capable, that is separate in the first place. And life is the only such form, because if you look at, the scientific view of the world, then most scientists today would agree that the best way to describe the world and reality is a giant unified field, a field that permeates everything. And in that field, there are certain things that pop up like a giant ocean And there are waves at the surface, and the waves at the surface, the configuration of the waves at the surface is what the reality appears like to be at a certain point in time. Like, for instance, the place of certain, planets and stars and the galaxies and all that stuff. And the next moment, the patterns of the waves on that sea change, and then you experience that as, the planets moving and all that stuff. But ultimately, it's all just one field out of everything emerging. And within such a field, a unified field, you cannot just arbitrarily draw a boundary saying, well, this is now a boundary and anything outside of this is outside and there's something that is inside. And the thought experiment is very easy. It's like if you take an ocean, there is no way to say, like, you draw an artificial boundary in the water and saying, now this part of the water, now this is now an inside and the rest of the ocean is the outside. It's very artificial in a way. It just doesn't work, right? Because there is no way to delineate, a certain part of the ocean as being the quote unquote inside and the rest of being outside. Everything is just one, right? But life has that kind of property. That is, even though its inner processes inside of life are a reflection of what happens on the outside, it isn't fully determined by this field of what the field does. Like if in the ocean there's a kind of wave coming, a droplet in the water cannot say, oh, there's this wave coming and I'm going to decide that I'm going to go against the current or with the current. It can't. But life can. It can harness internal mechanisms for experiencing a specific thing, like going with the flow or against the flow. And so life, to me, is the form or the strategy for a dissociated consciousness to overcome the illusion of separation by using life to gradually overcome separation. And so that's the telos of what is observed with life. That is, life multiplies and then assembles into more complex forms, not necessarily for evolutionary purposes. To me, it is this process of overcoming the illusion of separation. That is, the moment they form a pluricellular organism, these pluricellular organisms become more and more and more complex until they reach very sophisticated beings like animals or even plants or humans that are also experiencing oneness, being one, out of many, many billions and billions and billions of parts that have assembled in such a way to overcome the illusion of separation. That is, that they're swimming in a swamp and they're all fighting for resources and all that stuff, right? So this is one step in a dissociated consciousness's experience in overcoming separation. And then time and space are instrumental for this dissociated consciousness to overcome the illusion of separation. That is all that time and space are meant to do. They're instrumental to it. So, in other words, as a dissociated consciousness, you don't experience time and space, you experience all of this simultaneously, and you're going to create as many illusions, as many universes, as many experiences as it is needed for you to overcome your trauma or your illusion of being separate. Because through that mechanism of being, told that you're separate or identified as being separate. And so maybe everything is happening simultaneously, and understand that there are steps to overcoming or peeling back the illusion of separation. And these steps are, if you're looking at the universe, you're looking at what needs to be unfolded by consciousness in order to overcome the illusion of separation. That is, I feel like I'm separate from the planet, from the solar system, from the stars, from the galaxy, and all that stuff. Just like a unicellular organism has the impression of being separate from my body. It doesn't have the impression of being my body, right? But the cells inside my body do identify with being a part of this. And by harmonizing their relations, they can give birth to a higher consciousness that has overcome the illusion of separation of being just a cell. And so, as humans organize in forming a collective global organism, it is as if now you've reached a point where you can overcome the illusion of separation and experience being a planet, a conscious planet, that again is one, that has an experience of being in oneness again, rather than a planet where, you know, different parts are fighting between each other and whatever, in this illusion of separation. And then when multiple planets, which is like multiple extraterrestrial civilizations or terrestrial civilizations for that matter, like planetary civilizations, let's say, when different conscious planetary civilizations interact with one another and also create harmony, then it's the solar system that now experiences itself in oneness instead of in separation. And then you do that until you peel back all of the layers of reality, going to the macro, but also in a mirror, going to the micro. So in other words, humans represent biology, becoming self-aware or overcome the illusion of separation via the rules of biology, you could say. So these microstructures basically are a mirror to the macrostructures. So now the planet becoming self-aware, it's like molecules or chemistry becoming self-aware, if you will, through humans, through biology. So just like, you know, your bones in your body are animated by your cells, then you could say that the whole planet is being animated by life, but animated in a coordinated kind of way, not like unicellular organisms and some rocks around it, right? Your bones inside your body move in a way that no unicellular organism could move rocks in a swamp. Like there's this material or physical or hard dimension to your bones, which serve as a kind of structuring scaffolding for the cells that surround them, in order to have a more defined or precise kind of experience, but not random, not like unicellular organisms moving a rock around, let's say, haphazardly. You're leveraging your bones to have very specific and real experiences and defined experiences. So the material side of this planet is like the bones, or like the bones of the planetary consciousness, basically, that then can have a billion of experiences. And when humans mold the planet into becoming a spaceship and then leave the planet, then it is in a sense the same as your cells organizing your bones in a way that they can now move and do things that they wouldn't be able to do without the material structures that they leverage for moving in a specific way. So and so that applies to all of the macrostructures and all the microstructures. So the solar system is at the atomic level. Then the galaxies are more like the subparticles. Galactic clusters is like the quarks. And then the universe is more like the photons. And then the multiverse is more like just this pure vibrations. And then once you reach that point, then your outside, your inside reality become one. And then you've peeled back all of the limitations and all the layers that you've self-imposed on yourself. And you experience oneness again. Now, understand that this process, though, happens simultaneously again, which means it's more like harmonic resonance. When you play a C key on a piano and you have your pedal, all of the other C chords are vibrating simultaneously. And so you could say that, again, coming back to this idea of the sharpening effect of a camera, where everything becomes sharper simultaneously, it doesn't become sharper from left to right or whatever. The same process happens at the universal level, which means And this is how you can think about it. Like, imagine if everything was evolving simultaneously. Like the first living cell, its rules, its internal rules that it set for itself, determine how it can arrange to form, the experiences of the multicellular organisms that can be built from the rules that it set upon itself. And those have a certain number of consequences, right? So imagine if that first cell and the first rule that it set for itself made it possible for unicorns and dragons and whatever to exist, right? And that happens simultaneously. Like the moment that those rules are there, poof, this also exists, and this experiments itself in a sort of a timeline. And then the lessons from that experience trickle back to the cell, which modifies its internal rules to say, well, that experience was very short. Let's try to overcome separation by refining those rules, making them even more, fine-tuned to have more experiences of overcoming separation. And then, it adapts the rules, and now unicorns and dragons are not possible anymore, but you can have tigers and zebras and gazelles and whatnot. And then that experiences itself, and then, goes, and so both kind of happen simultaneously. And there's this feedback loop that's happening where everything grows and expands simultaneously. And so one kind of metaphor also I give to try to relate to that is, again, like you drop a pebble inside or in the middle of a perfectly still lake, and there's this wave pattern that spreads, right? And it spreads in all directions simultaneously. And it grows at every point of that circle. It expands simultaneously. And so that's kind of how you can picture, this dissociated consciousness as overcoming its illusion of separation by tweaking the rules of life in order to enfold more and more things from its limitations and from its structures to overcome more and more separation, more and more the illusion of separation, until there is absolutely nothing that it can now think of as being separate. And so that's the to me, like the cosmic kind of cycle is consciousness is in oneness, consciousness interacts with itself and unwittingly has this reaction of maybe this is something outside of myself, which creates dissociation within itself, and then that dissociated consciousness creates holographic or virtual realities and leverages time and space as instruments to overcome the illusion of separation and go back to oneness. And then you just do this indefinitely, because there's no breaking out of this cycle. And so how is it useful to us here, for us humans on this planet? It is that there is no escaping that telos. It's impossible for escaping this cycle. It's just that this cycle is hyper slow or long. And so you can have the illusion of escaping it by prolonging the illusion of separation for like a generation or two of humans. But eventually it's not going to change much in the ultimate master plan, let's say, or the ultimate, finality of the universe. It's just that the experience associated with either accelerating and wanting to overcome the illusion of separation quicker or slowing down are going to be more or less pleasant. So if you try to, for instance, overcome the illusion of separation too fast, and you say you are living 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, where there's very little morality, there's still a lot of violence, you may have a very hard experience, because maybe affirming separation and protecting this boundary of unconditional love that overcame separation is important at that point. And simultaneously, At the same time, if you are too late in overcoming separation, then you feel the tensions that arise from that, from being late. And that's what's happening to us today, to me. It is that maintaining the illusion of separation 5,000 years ago, it wouldn't result in humanity's self-destruction. The fact that people are clubbing each other to death didn't endanger the entire human civilization. But nowadays, if you just have a conflict between two leaders, I mean, it can very well mean the end of the world tomorrow, because somebody gets a little pissed off and presses on a button, and then it starts nuclear war, and then we're all dead. And the only thing so basically free will is circumscribed to the freedom of going a little faster or slower in this process. That's mostly what we can do with free will, and also what you can experience on the side, the side quests, of experiencing, how should I say this? While the dissociated consciousness experiences it as kind of maybe subjectively as a trauma of being deemed separate, and of being in this sense of separation and saying, oh my God, now I'm not part of the one, now I'm not one again, even though it is just an illusion that it is not one, because there's no other place to go than consciousness and unity. It can take pleasure in the process of overcoming the illusion of separation, which is a crazy thought if you think about it, which means as humans, we have the privilege of enjoying the illusion of separation by, eating an ice cream or whatever, because otherwise we're just a field that is waving and, stuff is happening in this reality, and there's no, does a droplet in the water in the ocean experience pleasure when a wave comes along and modifies its internal state to wave with the wave? It's ridiculous, right? But that's what the illusion of separation allows for, is to take pleasure in both remaining relatively separate, because your cells, your bodily cells, didn't fuse together into a kind of non-dissociated oneness, but harmonized, or it's almost as if they enjoyed their state of separation in order to form a harmonious whole, which sort of magnifies their pleasure of staying separate to a certain degree. Because if they and it's really how should I say this? Overcoming separation, you could also do that by swallowing up everything, which means you could have this one cell that says, you know what, just all become me, just fuse with me, and then we're just going to be one. We're going to be one cell. There's going to be nothing on the outside anymore, and thereby we will have overcome separation, and that's it, the end, right? Just swallow up everything, or you fuse everything into yourself. But I don't think it's not as rich as an experience, as rather taking pleasure in your relative state of separation, and yet harmonizing to a degree with other self-similar structures, that you give birth to a bigger entity that now also experiences oneness and has a unitary kind of experience. Like right now, I feel like I'm one. I'm not like a finger that is dissociated from me, or I feel that like when I touch my finger, this is part of my experience, what I am. And so you could wonder if why would overcoming the illusion of separation, why would it be quote unquote better in the enfolding strategy, that is, you sort of grow consciousness to the point where you envelop all of reality, rather than the fusing form, where you just swallow everything up and you become one, right? And I think there are these two polarities then tugging at us, because in a certain sense, conquerors and there have been people that try to go about this kind of fusion thing. But yeah, I just think that you convince yourself, this dissociated consciousness is more thoroughly convinced that it has overcome separation via the harmonization of all of its structures than via, just swallowing the entire universe and just saying, forget all this. Let's not try to harmonize things. You just all be me, and then that's it, right? And so it's a kind of it's almost like lying to yourself. It's an illusion of an illusion. It's not as powerful. It's not as powerful as the inclusion one. It's almost like you're looking at yourself in the mirror and you're trying to say to yourself, like, repeatedly, that I'm smart, or I'm funny, right? And it may work, but it's not as powerful as being validated as being funny or smart or whatever by the other, right? The alter ego. And so that's probably why the universe goes about enfolding rather than fusing everything into oneness, back into oneness, which is a kind of a poor way to overcome the illusion of separation, and doesn't fully convince the dissociated self that it is totally reunified, or that it is back to oneness. Because you don't do the work, you don't do the whole process. In other words, by doing the inclusive process, you exhaust all possibilities of separation that exist within yourself, all of them. You exhaust all potential scenarios, all potential alternatives, and you manage to harmonize all of it, absolutely all of it. And that's the story of biology. That is, you have these unicellular organisms that explore all of the potential ways that they can interact with each other. And once they've done that, they've sort of exhausted the illusion of separation at that point, and then they play that game at a higher level via more complex creatures like animals, plants, and eventually humans. And we're also, as humans, in the process of exhausting all of the possible interactions and experiences that can come out of humans interacting with each other, almost like copies of the same idea interacting with itself, to see all of the facets, all of the possibilities that can emerge from that structure. And then once it has exhausted that, then you can move on to the next level, and so on and so on and so on. And so that's a much more powerful way to remove the illusion of being in separation. And so even cause and effect, all of these different things like time, space, or whatever, are instrumental for the dissociated consciousness to convincingly remove its sense of separation. That's all that they're for. They're just instruments to that end. And it'll take the time that it takes, and it can build other kinds of rules if it wants to, in order to explore, what still remains as separate and non-harmonized. So those can be subject to change, but the telos there, to me, that is the most fundamental telos that will never change. So I hope you found this video interesting. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and talk to you in the next video.